What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the eSkate Chat podcast with Evolve.
Are we going to use the technology from what's on the Hayden series?
It's changing that whole final drive ratio.
Surfing this endless wave through Tokyo.
Electric skateboarding is like breaking through.
Every time I wanted to drink, I would step on this board.
I heard somebody say Hayden.
100%.
We'd love to build our own specialized e-skate track. I mean, the amount of thought that went into that.
I want to talk about how it affected the riders.
So I went skating with Tony Hawk.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Really? There's a whole new product line.
I've done things I never thought I'd be able to do because of electric skateboarding.
Can you break it down? Like, what was the history? What got Jeff into this? I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, well, mate, I've been surfing all my life. I love snowboarding. And I remember I didn't get into snowboarding till late, when I was about 28, I think it was. So I had my first trip then. And I kind of look back, if I had have found snowboarding back when I was 17 or 18, or I lived closer to it, man, I think I would have been one of those dudes that would have just like traveled, all around the ski seasons and done all that. But no, I lived on the Gold Coast, and it's a surf industry here. But yeah, I went on my first snowboard trip.
You grew up in the Gold Coast?
Yep. Born and bred here. Yep. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I ended up going with Trav. You know Trav.
I do.
Yeah, we went on a first snowboarding trip together, and oh man, we had a lot of fun, and I just fell in love with it. It was like I just couldn't get over the fact that you could go down these like mountains. They were like sort of slides and minutes at a time, and never have any kick push, like you do on a skateboard. And that's what I just remember coming back and just going, this is just insane. And
where was that? Where did you guys ride?
Perisher, in Australia.
That's
Snowy Mountains. It's in New South Wales.
Snowy Mountains. I do know where that is. Yeah.
It's what I love about the Australian snow is that it's harsh. Like it's like the terrain. Like you get these like bush rocks, and then you have these snowy gums, and you can do these tree runs, and it's like it's typical Australiana sort of bush and harsh terrain and environment, and then you got snow in it, and it's just so Australian, but it's got snow. That's what I love about it.
What does that look like? You travel from the Gold Coast. How far you drive out for 6 hours, 8 hours? What is that?
It's a mission, man. Like you've got to get on a plane. You got to fly to Canberra, so it's like a 2.5 hour flight. Then you have to hire a car, and then you have to drive 4 hours inland to get to it. So it's costly and expensive and takes ages. It's actually quicker where I am at the moment, Gold Coast, to go to New Zealand. So it's like a 3 hour flight. I land straight in Queenstown, and that's why so many Aussies love going over to Queenstown, because it's just easier to access, and the snow's great. Yeah, but yeah, and then back to eSkate. How does this all sort of intertwine? I ended up having a surf at Stratty, which is on the Gold Coast, on the northern end, famous surf spot, great beach breaks, lefts, rights, and I'd been out there, came back, and I was getting dry out and getting ready to drive home, and then next minute I saw this dude on a skateboard, and he wasn't kick pushing at all. He was just carving, and I was mesmerized.
2008.
It was 2008. Yep, 2008, early 2008, and he wasn't kick pushing at all, and I was just going, what the hell is that? And I'd just been for a rad surf, just got back from Perisher. I had the froth going, and then I was just watching this guy, and I was like, what? That's electric. Well, I've never seen this before. You never see them around. So then after that, I just went home, told Fleur straight away, my wife, and I was like, man, I just seen this dude on a skateboard. He wasn't kick pushing. It's got to be electric. Opened the laptop, started looking, Googled electric skateboards, and yeah, I found them. And
who was it? Who was it at the time? Altered, or one of the LA brands?
Altered were the guys. They were the main guys in US, and they had the patent on it.
They were just down the street from us. I used to skate with them in Venice, actually, back in the early 2000s. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah, right.
Full circle.
But
they had the at that point, I don't know if it was 2008, but didn't they have the wire that would connect it? Because they had a Bluetooth one, and then it was like the story that I heard, which I don't know if this is true, but that they like the frequency of their Bluetooth or whatever they were using at that time was the same as the lights in the area, like the traffic lights and that, or something of that nature, and that those would, potentially really fuck you up, and
just take off by itself.
Yeah, just take off by itself or break unexpectedly. But so then they wired them, and there was two brands, and they were both local, like within a couple miles of here.
Eagle-eyed and Altered with it.
Eagle-eyed had the wire. Yeah, Eagle-eyed had the wire. Altered was on Pico down the street from here. Oh wow!
So
how cool!
Yeah,
small world.
So that's what I found. Yeah. I found those guys, and then I was like, "Where are there any in Australia?" And there was one guy in Australia doing it in Victoria, and he had an eBay site. That's all it was, and they were called Chronic boards, and then all the other boards, they looked like the Altered boards. And then I found on Alibaba in China all the China brands doing it as well. They were all the same boards. They were just, the decks were big. They didn't feel like skateboards. They felt like toys, like the material and the design of it. And
they were using, I think they were using nickel hydrate batteries. I mean, the things were huge. They were like 100 pounds. Yeah, lead acids, right? They were huge.
Yep, and battery cases were like this. They were tanks, big motor controllers, massive cylindrical motors. But what got me though is the wheels and the trucks. That's the skateboard part of the board. Aside from the electronics, you rip all that off. The skateboard part of the board was just crap. It was, the wheels are like 100 mil. They weren't urethane. They were like either rubber or they were like very plastic. Material, and then the way the drive system was, the hub, the gear was molded to the hub, and then so that if you broke a gear, you had to replace the whole wheel. And what I noticed then, there was none of the boards were using quality wheels, except for I know what's it called? Altered had they did manage to use ABEC.
Yeah, they used the flywheels. I remember that when they got that, when they came out with those flywheels, the big green wheels. But those were pretty narrow at the time, and they were great wheels. I'm not knocking that at all. But given the heft of that board, like you're saying, like the skate aspect of it, like it left a little bit to be desired. You just had so much weight.
It wasn't right. But hey, I bought one. Took 6 weeks to arrive. I opened the box up and I was like, whoa, this is a tank. And anyway, jumped straight on it, and it was so much fun. Like, even though the ride wasn't great, but it was just the fact that you could take this and you could ride it anywhere at any time of the day. If the surf was shit or it was 10 o'clock at night, you wanted to clear your head. It was the concept of it that I was really drawn to.
Understood. Totally.
And that's where it all started for me, man, back then. And then what was going through my head was just how can you make this like this other board that I've got that had proper trucks and nice urethane on it, and I couldn't get out of my head like, all right, if I can just like bolt this onto that, like surely the ride will instantly change. It'll turn into something really cool. So yeah, that was a long time ago, man. That's how it all started. So I want to know about some of your history though. Like, when did you guys start, and how?
So we're about to launch our 21st year anniversary board. We are June 2022 was our first year. Our first year that we launched the board. But let me backtrack. So I grew up in LA, born and raised, but I traveled for many years. I went out to college in New York. And to get around New York in the 90s, mid 90s, unlike you, I did fall in love with snowboarding when I was 14. When I was 14, I took my first ski trip, actually, and to the local mountains here, to Big Bear in LA. And I saw snowboarding at that point and I haven't skied since. So, but all I wanted to do was snowboard. So I spent the next few years, getting through high school, having a blast, and going to New York. I started a snowboard club in college and was very, in retrospect, I probably should have done what you said and like become a snowboard bum and explored the world snowboarding. But it was a different era then. That wasn't really something that, at least that wasn't part of my worldview. I didn't really see that as part of like an actual experience. Today I would think differently, but at that point
this was in the 90s. Like how big was snowboarding then? You're 14, like.
So I know about this a lot in retrospect because our major manufacturer, Ernie, and Chuck Barfoot, were the inventors. There was Chuck Barfoot, Tom Sims, Jake Burden in the late 70s, and Ernie DeLost, who's been doing most of our boards for the past 17, 18 years. They were the early innovators of snowboarding. There was a guy, Dimitri, who did winter stick back in the early 70s, who was far and away the godfather of snowboarding. But really, snowboarding started in the late 70s, early 80s. So when I first started snowboarding was probably 88 or 89. 89. 88, 89, that winter was the first time I saw it. And it was still pretty counterculture. It was anti-ski. It was bringing surfing and skateboarding to, especially skateboarding, even more than surfing, to the snow. And it was a very, very different era. I like to joke about like my daughter, who's 13 now. She when she was 2, I'm like, okay, do you want to ski or you want to snowboard? And she's like, well, snowboarding's for old people, so I'm going to ski. So things do come around. Do come around. But at that era, it was a really, really exciting era for snowboarding throughout the 90s. And as a skater, I grew up skateboarding, so it's always been part of my DNA. Literally, like my mom grew up in LA, and she would take her old roller skates and chop them up and make them into skateboards. So there's always a skateboard around the house. So me and my siblings, my mom will still get on a skateboard, which is terrifying, but it's pretty awesome. So skateboarding's always been part of my DNA, but I do like street skating. I do appreciate it and I do enjoy it, but I've always like the carving, that like soulful, flowy experience of snowboarding has always spoken to me in a pronounced way. So that, going through college, going through high school, I was skating, and then got a car, found girls, and like that was, I kind of put skateboarding to some extent to the side for about 4 years, and then when I hit college, one of my buddies in my dorm had a skateboard, so got back into skateboarding, started a snowboard club, as I mentioned earlier, and really wanted to embrace snowboarding again in a more serious way. And then in New York, as a way to get around New York City in the mid-90s, it was, the building, there was, Section 9 existed, but I wasn't aware of them. And longboarding really wasn't a thing at all, or big wheels weren't a thing. And I started taking old skateboards, but mainly old snowboards, and chopping them up throughout college and using that to build these longboards that I would ride. Me and my buddy would ride. Where we lived in New York, there was a big hill, and we would ride down that hill every night and take a cab back up for $1. And we would just do that, over and over. That was like our local ski slope.
Just go back a sentence. You used to get snowboards and you used to chop that up, and then you used to turn that into longboards.
Exactly.
How cool.
That was early 90s. I was friends with a bunch of the reps for Ride and for Mervyn, which is GNU and Libtech in New York in the 90s. And so I'd get a bunch of like these prototype decks and stuff, and like these offcuts and stuff, and things that blend decks and then just chop them up and make skateboards out of them. So at that point, we were riding the Crypto Classics, the 70 millimeter Crypto Classics, which were the biggest, softest wheel of that era. And that's who we, on Indy 190s and 215s, and that was before Randall. And then living in New York, it's interesting because in that era, in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the longboard industry was developed here in San Diego with Sector 9 and Gravity, but a tremendous amount of it came out of New York City in that era. And the history is actually interesting. Apparently, a little bit after I left, it was like the weed delivery services, which would happen in New York City. Today it's all on e-bikes, or today it's probably illegal, I assume. But at that point, it was not. And it was a whole community of people who would ride skateboards around New York City as a way of, delivering weed or whatnot. And that is a little insight into the history of longboarding, like one of the kind of like the key components that drove modern longboarding in, like I'm saying, late 90s, early 2000s. So I left New York in 2000, in January, February 2000, moved back to LA, and my dad had a clothing company in LA, and he said, come back to LA, work for me part-time and build your own company out of here, which he did with all my siblings. We've all built our own very, very different businesses.
Yeah, right. But, entrepreneurial family.
It is. I mean, I think, we can go deep into that, but long story short, like I feel like one of the things I love about the United States and love about like Western culture is this entrepreneurial spirit. Unfortunately, I don't feel like it's being taught in the way it should be. And I think like for the most part, I don't know about you, but for me, a lot of that education came from home. It's from, being from a family of entrepreneurs on both sides in my family. So my dad worked for my mom's dad, making cheesy Hawaiian shirts in downtown LA, and so that's what I grew up doing. Was designing Hawaiian shirts as a kid. And,
I can sort of share a little bit with that as well. And I've got a business degree, and I feel as though this has not helped me in business at all. Like, apart from communicating and trying to commit to something and finish tasks, at the end of the day, starting a business, you just have to do it, and you have to pivot and roll with the punches, and then kind of learn on the fly. And then talking to family, my dad too, he had a curtain business for many years, and then Dad took it over, my grandpa. And so for me, I saw a lot of work ethic and the stresses of running a gig through my dad, and he certainly inbred a lot of work ethic sort of culture and that mindset into me from there.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, and I think there's a lot of parallels there. To provide a little bit of a counterpoint, so my dad was really adamant that I study either business or engineering, he was an engineer turned businessman. So I studied literature and astronomy, of course, because of course. And now I do, as you do, right? Just to fuck with your parents, but also like now what I do is I do business and engineering, and I love it. But I agree with you. It's interesting that you studied it, because I don't think if I had studied business at that point, I would have been able to. I don't think I would have gotten much out of it. I think I needed to be more hands-on and apply it. And I think if I had studied it, I don't think I would have really been able to. And I continue to study. Now I study business and engineering extensively because they're very interesting to me. But and I see the creativity in them. But at that point, literature and astronomy to me were much more creative and interesting than business was. And coming back, at this point, doing business, I've learned over the years, especially from my dad. So when I came back to LA, I was ostensibly supposed to work for my dad, but he really worked for me. He was like the CFO / CEO of my business. And for about 7 years.
the business, were you talking loaded, right? You'd already kicked off?
So I spent so when I moved back in 2000, I spent like 6 months making skate clothing. I decided I'm going to build a skate clothing company because he had a clothing company. I like skateboarding. That seemed like a good fit. And after about 6 months, I realized that, look, that's not my strength. I'm not a fashion guru. That's not what I like. Functionally driven design. I like making things. I've always liked to build things. I mean, as a kid with an engineer dad, I was always making and creating and, just breaking things and putting them back together. Yeah. And that's always been, a big part of my, just part of my education, part of my upbringing. And part of what I love, and like the functional design of functional design is something that really appeals to me. And my dad is an engineer who knew, who's an immigrant, who knew nothing about skateboarding, more for good than for bad, because he supported what I was doing. He didn't understand skate culture. He didn't understand anything about what I was doing. He would tend to bring in these engineering insights into what we were doing that were, just very unique and very, I guess, radical for the time. Like when we launched our first board, the Vanguard in 2002, 3 months before we were about to launch that board, I went out skating with a friend, and he wasn't a great skater, and he got wheel bite. He ate shit, and he went down, as you do. And but if you're a skater, you kind of know the parameters of when you're going to get wheel bite, when you're not. And at that point, there was no concept of there was wheel wells, but there was no wheel cutouts. That just didn't exist. Yeah. And that was and you guys do that. I mean, I'll take some credit, maybe rightfully so, maybe not, but for what you guys, for like the modern skateboard design sensibility, where you have these big wheel cutouts, it makes total sense. But at the time in 2001, 2002, there was nothing like that existed. Yeah, and right. My dad as an engineer, he's like, that's not a problem. I came into the office pretty dejected the next day, and he's like, what's wrong? I told him the story, and he said, well, why don't you just do wheel cutouts? And I'm like, you can't do wheel cutouts. He's like, why not? He's like, nobody's ever done wheel cutouts. He's like, so what? And it was just one of those things.
What did the first shape look like of the Vanguard though? How different was it compared to now?
It looked like a snowboard. It was like a big rounded. It was like there's a side cut because I wanted torsional looseness. There's a side cut or like a waist to it, and then it would come into like a rounded end. It didn't come in. Yeah. And then what I did after that conversation, I went with a jigsaw and started cutting out like the most minimal wheel cutouts possible. Oh, and wow. They're very angular, and I try one side angular and one side more like tangent arcs and more flowy. And then you'd find that the flowy turns, and if you develop these tangent arcs, you can get these really refined flex characteristics out of the board. And I think that was one of the most primary drivers of our design sensibility today, was figuring out how, shaping curve, and it's 3D shaping, right? It's compound contours. So you're dealing with camber, concave, composite, the materials, and then the shapes, and then creating these very organic shapes to create flex where you want it to be. That's what led to the Vanguard.
That's an amazing story. So as you were refining that wheel cutout, like what was the process? Was it a lot of trial and error where you're just like standing on the board and trying to make it wheel bite and then slowly start shaping it? And once you shaped it, then you had to like bring that into the rest of the skate deck design so it actually looked cool.
So this is 2001, 2002. So it's like I was using Corel Draw. It was very, or just literally cutting this out by hand. So exactly that. It was like kind of like testing it was very much trial and error. And then as we developed more sophisticated CAD experience, we were able to use the tangent arcs and use, all these really new, these relatively new technologies to be able to develop much more what I'd call organic or tangent shapes, which would allow the boards to flex in very specific and very intentional ways.
So from there, did you see a lot of other longboard companies start entering the market and starting to do similar shapes and cutouts and?
No and yes. So that era in the early 2000s was a really creative era. There was a bunch of longboard brands building really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of very creative, and there was like early internet, a lot of like, it was pre-Reddit. So it was like, we had Silverfish, and before that we had the NCDSA, Northern California Downhill Skateboard Association. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That was like a forum where all the brands would get on. This is back in the early 2000s. So there's a lot of things happening, a lot of creative exploration, and a lot of collaboration of ideas that are happening. But in terms of like the shapes, so the Vanguard shape today is kind of, or that wheel, that wheel cutout shape today is the standard. But that took a long time. That took, I'd say, about 10 years until like the late 2000s, probably like 2010, until that became a standard shape. It was really not. We were also, even until then, until 2007, 2008, we were doing interesting things, I think, but like it was, the exposure was very limited. We were a small brand, doing a few hundred boards a year. And it was only in 2007 when we launched the Dervish. To give a little bit more insight, in 2006, our supplier of wood, we were using this tan oak, vertically laminated tan oak. So we took snowboard technology applied to skate. So it's a vertically laminated core with triaxial fiberglass and epoxy top and bottom. And the tan oak cores, our supplier decided that they weren't going to supply us anymore. They were doing huge projects and they weren't interested in supplying us. So we had to scramble, and we found bamboo, and that was a huge blessing in disguise. And bamboo allowed us to do drop throughs, because bamboo is such a beautiful and amazing material and such a clean material. They were able to do cutouts and drop throughs. So we launched the Dervish, which was our first drop through cambered, which was the first drop through cambered board, to my understanding. And that's what put us on the map, I think, was bringing all that history of wheel cutouts and shaping and composites and compound contours, but using that bamboo material really allowed us to do some amazing things that were very, very radical for the time.
But what got me when we were talking about this board, and I found your process interesting in terms of the design, I have to say, and it was about you were really wanting us to work out the name first before we start getting into the design of the deck and the graphics and all this, and for us, what we normally do is we do it a little differently. We just build it, and then we write it, and then we start thinking about it, and it's like, how does it make us feel? And then we try to come up with a name. And then you, in this process, you were pushing me to go, we've got to get a name before we start doing this. And so then we had to then do it reverse, which I found that interesting.
We have two brands. We have Loaded and Orangutan, and they work very differently. So for Loaded, it's concept first. For Loaded, we want to know what the concept is, what we're trying to achieve, what the ethos is, what the values are, and let that drive everything else.
Yeah.
Like, let's figure out what we're trying to do, which is why I brought that up. For Orangutan, it's a little different. Like, Orangutan, it's more like, let's fuck with people, let's have fun with them, let's like, it's a different style like of approach. But for the deck design, I do think so. One of the things that I was hoping to bring to the table, which I think we did, I think we can do better in the future, but I think we did a good job here, is e-skate design historically has been, I don't want to call it bland, but it's been very function first. And I'm very much a functionally driven design kind of person, but I also think the aesthetics, like we wanted to bring in more color, more feel to it. Like I think there's a lot of room to play with, to push the boundaries of what an e-skate is, of what it, making an e-skate part of an aesthetic, personal experience. And I'm hoping we did that. We achieved that.
It's interesting you say that, like when you're talking about the color and this is definitely, we haven't released a board that looks like this at all, and we've definitely had some interesting feedback from some of our partners and wives who have seen the board for the first time, and I remember Maddie's wife Beck. Maddie was telling me the story that because he had the board at home and he was doing something with it, and then she saw it. She goes, "Whoa, what's that? Oh mate, that's beautiful." So it was the colors and the shapes and the grip tape that was quite eye catching, and I think
it's kind of what you were talking about before. It's like the e-skate world to some extent has gotten caught up in specs and tech and what's the range, what's the power, like
it's true.
That's not really so what but it's also totally not true. It's also not what it should be. It's part of the game. It's part of the continuum of what it should be, and we should be able for that. You guys are well set up. You know how to make that stuff in the highest possible level, but also for the average person, you don't need to be able to go 60 miles on your board.
Yep.
Like that's just not a prerequisite for, you're not going to do that. So like, how do we like push the and aesthetics are secondary to us. We're function first, but also the aesthetics are part of it. Like we have this platform. We have this what's the word? We have this canvas that we can design on, and we create like interesting experiences on that people can relate to and can have great experiences with. And I feel like e-skate over the past few years has gotten way too focused on specs. It's gotten too, from my perspective, outside perspective, has gotten too focused on specs. And I think it's good. Sorry, Jeff, but it's good. It's good that that's driving things, because that does definitely drive power, but to some extent, and it does drive potential, but to some extent, like that's only part of the puzzle.
Yep, I agree with everything you're saying. 100% over the last 2 years. It has been all about specs. Like it's definitely been about the range and how much capacity and how much you can fit in that tight little package, and without making it into like this tank of a tank that when you add performance, there's a drawback. You add weight, and then that changes things. It's hard to pick up, and it changes the ride. You can feel it underfoot when you're riding something that's light versus something that's a tank. And over the last couple of years, I feel as though certainly the industry has been about that, is upping the specs by 2 kilometers per hour, or adding an extra cell for that little bit more range, and it drives the cost of the product up more. And I feel as though it has been getting a bit lost. Like at the end of the day, all the boards are going to have a lot of the very similar specs. But it's got to be about the ride. It's got to be about what's beautiful, and it's got to be about, really, at the end of the day, you're riding the product.
And I don't, everybody's got their own capabilities and their own interests, but like for me personally, and I think I speak for to some extent for a vast majority of people, I don't need to be going faster than 15 miles an hour, 25 kilometers an hour. Like that's plenty fast.
That's
I
the
don't need a
sweet
40
carving speed, actually. 23 to 25, that's where you're going to get the most value for carve. Otherwise, you're going to be doing these big, wide, long, fast turns.
Right. And there's people that speaks to.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. I'm glad we have a component of our industry and our community that's really pushing those boundaries. But for the vast majority of people, that's outside of their scope of what they're looking for. And I think we need to tailor to all of the above. But I think we primarily need to build products for people, for the average person, like to make this thing into something that's super fun for everybody, for the vast majority of people. So.
Well, I mean, I hope this board, this Collab Onirique is received like that, because I think it's a really fun board. It looks amazing. It rides killer. I have to say, compared to the Stoke board that we have out, that's been a popular product of ours. Jumping on this and understanding the deck, the science behind where the shapes are where, took me a little bit of getting used to. Like I think after maybe 15 minutes, I worked it out. I was like, all right, this is where my feet need to be and I'm most comfortable. But once I really gelled with it, man, I feel as though I've got way more control. Like I actually love getting that back foot and just pushing that little shimmy out. And during a slide, I found it's very.
Well, you know where you
easy
are
to do
on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things we're trying to develop with the wheel flares in the front and the back is that you know where your foot position is at all given times. Like one of the things with e-skate is as you feel the vibrations of them, your feet move back and forth on a flat deck. And we wanted to develop a board where you were locked in and you knew where you were without having to look down. I want to be able to ride that board. I want to feel where I'm at any given time. And I want to feel like I'm locked in. I know where I am and I'm consistently feeling the same experience. I know that if for the way we designed the board, there's a lot of ways of riding it, but for me personally, it's 1 foot behind the back flare, 1 foot in front of the back flare, in front of the front flare. Right? That's how I ride it.
Yep.
Right? Which I think will be the majority. You can ride both feet in the center, but that's kind of fun right there with the back foot and back and the front foot in the back foot in right behind the back flare and the front foot in right behind the front flare. You know where you are and you're going to ride for hours. You're still in the same position and you don't have to look down. You're connected to your board. You have the right concave. Ergonomically, it feels very comfortable and very appropriate, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're good at. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we learned of the years of working with Boosted, the years of doing the unlimited stuff, is that our forte is on the ergonomic deck development. We're building, and I would love, I know it was a long conversation, but I'd love to do a quick run through of our R&D facility. If we can. Yeah. But we're building 2 to 3 boards or more a week right now out of our in-house facility. So we're constantly creating, making all kinds of cool things. And we're in a position right now, which is for me the most fun, where we're constantly testing and trying and feeling and experiencing things on a level we haven't been able to for 23 years.
Wow,
that's the highest level we've been able to do.
Wow.
For 23 years.
That's rad, man. And coming up with all these ideas, like who is this, like a team effort? Is these shared ideas, or who's the driver, or what is the driver?
So that's a great question, and it's a complicated question. For the most part, we've tried to do like one person who really believes in whatever we're trying to do, and we try to realize their vision. If there's one person who wants to do downhill or e-skate or dancing or whatever it is, well, we found this over the years. We had at certain points 10 years ago, we had 10 people involved in a certain project, and it was too many compromises, too many cooks in the kitchen, and we wouldn't be able to. There was a lot of compromises in the process, and there'd be a little bit of this for this person, a little bit of that for that person, and nobody was happy in the end of the day. So right now is we focus on one person who we really trust in-house, who's going to be able to, who really believes in it. And we have a bunch of people here who believe in the Evolve e-skate experience and who are big proponents of that. And they're helping us, so it's me. I'm very involved in like the more conceptual side of the product development. I'll do like a lot of the conceptual CAD side of it. Julie, who's our in-house engineer right now, who'll do the more specific, more very detailed side, and then we'll have one rider. That's the way we've focused on right now. One rider who really understands it, really, like Dusty, who's been in a bunch of the videos that we're going to be showcasing.
He shreds, by the way.
Onirique. He very much does. He's a ripper. Totally ripper. He's a tremendous human being on so many levels.
Cool.
On so many levels. But yeah, he's fucking rad. He's our second in command in the warehouse and has been for 12, 13 years now.
Yeah, right.
But he rides that board every day. Like that's his go-to board.
Oh,
and
sick.
Yeah, he rides that for commuting, for everything, and that's so he's able to spend the time. I think like in development, you need the conception, you need the conceptualization of the product. You also need the time on the board. You need someone who's going to spend hours and hours to work through all the kinks and what does it feel like after you ride it for 15 hours? What it feels like for after you ride it for 75 hours. It's a different thing. So, and that's our forte. We've realized, like I was saying before, like we realized the electrical side, you guys do it great. We don't want to do that. Like we realized that's not our forte. That's not what we want to do in the future. And we'd love to work with you guys on a lot of projects going forward, because we do want to see skate. We do want to see, electrical motors are going to get smaller, batteries are going to get smaller and thinner, as you described earlier. It's only going to happen, right? That's the reality of what we're going to see. So how do we want to be part of that, but we also want to be part of that in the way that's real to who we are. So we're able to make ergonomic mechanical decks, trucks, and wheels around those products. You guys build. I'm not knocking you guys, because you guys build great wheels, great trucks, and great decks as well. We think we have a lot to add to that conversation, and we'd like to do that. A much higher level going forward.
Well, this is the first start of it, and we've been using your wheels for a long time, and we've always loved the decks. I love the innovation. I love the different material choices, and I can see how it's got that snowboard background. The influence, you can definitely see the way it's laid up, and it's really cool. It's obvious, but yeah, I think it's purposeful products that's designed for a particular rider and a particular way of riding. I think this could be a further future for certain product offerings between us. and we're interesting to see how this goes. I can't wait for people to ride it. Can't wait to hear the feedback. And I'm actually looking forward to more people riding street boards, because AT has been like a big focus for e-skate for a long time, and it'll be interesting. I'm hoping that there's going to be more people.
AT is
all terrain, the big wheels.
All terrain. Yeah. The pneumatics.
Yeah.
I think they're cool, but for us, like, I think, we're talking about the history before about why we work with Boosted, why we're working with you guys today. And I think for us, from our perspective, Evolve represents, and I'm not kissing ass here. Like, this is very much an authentic feeling, is that you guys are leading the charge in terms of developing an authentic community of skate. You're not trying to be anything that you're not. You guys are trying to make e-skate accessible and fun for the whole world, and that's awesome. And that's something we very much want to be involved with. Like, for Loaded, that's I think that's very clearly why we're here today, why we're doing this. Because it's a meeting of the minds. It feels very right. It feels, like you said, you've been trying to do this with us for many years. Now's the time, and it feels really, really right. We're excited to do this, and we're really, really excited to do a lot more stuff together. I think we're working on some really interesting mechanical stuff that I think I'm excited to see what you guys have done.
Eyebrow raising.
Yes, eyebrow raising. Exactly. And there's a lot more to be explored. So you guys build community. You're authentic. You're doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it in the right way, in our perspective, and it means a lot.
Yeah,
and we're stoked to be part of it.
Yeah, thanks for that, mate. Look, we love what we do. We're trying. We're working hard. It's not easy running a business, but we're all passionate about what we do, and we're looking forward to this event that's coming up on the 9th over in Oceanside. That's going to be cool. If anyone who's in the area on the 9th on the Saturday, come past Oceanside. You guys are going to be there. We're going to be there. We're going to have a little track set up. We want all these Oniriques. They're going to be on demo. So come in, have a crack, check these out, and we just want to have some fun. That's all. We just want to have fun.
Exactly. Let's have fun. Let's not try to be anything more than what we are.
Yeah.
I think that's been the nemesis of a lot of our precursors, but we're the next generation of this. Let's have fun. Let's make cool shit.
And like you said, there's a stepping stone. So can't wait to hear feedback, what people think. There might be some new ideas that'll come from this as well. Once it gets in the hands of customers, and we look forward to hearing what they think, and then I guess what's next.
Agreed. Okay, cool. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fun.
We
can talk shit for ages.
Seems like it.